I just want to give my reaction on this news. I've monitoring Nvidia and Intel's for a while now, and this news when it came out, right, it still shocks me because I didn't expect they can come up to this kind of investment plus partnership, because usually these two companies, they are more like a competitor than a partners, right? But it seems that under the new leaderships of Intel, right, Liputan, we can tell that they are pivoting a lot in many aspects of their business. And this is just one of them. I think there are many more that will come. So we'll go into the details of this partnership, talk about what's the details, and then what's the impact to the other companies as well. Let's start with the slide. So, okay, let's go through first what was actually announced. So there are two products tracked. The first one, right, is data center. So now Intel will build custom x86 CPU that Nvidia will buy and integrate into its NVLink rack scale AI system, positioning x86 on similar footing to Nvidia ARM-based Grace or follow-on CPUs in NVL72 class architectures. So right now, right, let's say for Nvidia's offering, because they are mainly selling GPU for data center, right? A computing system, right, they cannot work with GPU alone. So for sure you need a CPU, right? I think there are mainly two tracks here. One is that they will have the CPU, whether it's coming from Intel or whether it's coming from AMD, right? Then the GPU will be coming from Nvidia. And these two, right, the CPU, GPU, they talk to each other using PCI Express. So there are all sorts of problems or limitations by using this PCI Express. And that's why Nvidia also have another track, right, which is that they have their Grace CPU, right? This is the ARM-based CPU that's designed by Nvidia. And I think the good thing is that the CPU and GPU both come from Nvidia. They are synchronized. They can talk to each other. And then in terms of the bandwidth of the communication between two is also very, very superior. But the problem is that not all enterprise, right, they're okay with this ARM architecture, because there are still many applications, like there are many companies, enterprises, they are all into x86 architecture, right? And they don't want to go into other forms of architecture, because if you do too much, right, then you are spreading out your resources too much, and it makes the offering or it makes the enterprise IT a lot more complicated. That's why like now for Nvidia, I think these partnerships, right, is actually quite big. They wanted to leverage on or penetrate into the x86, and they want to solve the problems of these PCI Express limitations. So this one, they definitely need a customized x86 CPU that can put together. Basically it will make the Grace CPU and Nvidia GPU, right, something, this kind of like high performance offerings, right, but they can just deploy it to x86 ecosystems. That's basically what they wanted to do. And then that's the first one. I think this is the key one, and I think this one will roll out first before the second one, which is the PC. So let me read out the notes here first. So for PCs, right, Intel will build x86 SoC with Nvidia RTX GPU chiplet inside, enabled by Intel packaging such as Foveros or EMIB, creating a new class of integrated graphics laptops where discrete GPUs are not always feasible. So I think this one is also quite interesting, because if you look at Intel current offering, right, basically they have their own integrated GPU, and then I think they are not doing well in that now. I mean, based on their current GPU, right, Intel one, I think the GPU chips actually is fab at TSMC, so it's like a chiplet. Then Intel have their own CPU. They are all fused together using all these connects, right, like Foveros or EMIB, right. But their own GPU, I think for the lower end one or mid-tier one, they are still trying to gain market share. But you know, in this GPU market, right, Nvidia is like they might be taking 80 or 90% of the market share already. The remaining is AMD. So it's very hard for them to penetrate into GPU business. Maybe only the lowest end where they just have the integrated GPU, right? That one, for those who just want the cheapest offering, they are not willing to pay for the AMD or Nvidia GPU, right? Then they are okay with Intel's offering. But those are very, very basic kind of offerings. But when we talk about all these discrete GPU, right, we're talking about competitions with Nvidia and AMD. I think Intel's, they just can't compete, because all these things is not just about the GPU performance, right? It is also about the software. That's why I think under this Liputan's leadership, right, maybe this GPU area is the area that they know that they are not going to do well. So they just want to cut back their resources and then focus their resources elsewhere. So that's why I think when this business from Nvidia come in, right, where they just do a tight integrations in terms of the CPU and GPU, and they can offer great performance products, and basically they just seed this market to Nvidia. So I think in these two product tracks, right, actually, yes, you can frame that it is a win-win for both, but my sense is I think Nvidia is still have more benefits for Nvidia rather than for Intel. But for Intel, I would say that they don't really have a choice, because you know they are struggling, right, in terms of their balance sheet, in terms of their financials. They don't do well. So now I think they just want to leverage on stuff that they have, or the assets that they have, and just build this kind of partnership that can serve their future. And I think one of these is definitely the x86 because x86, right, it's not like Nvidia, they can just design their own CPU and then make a x86, right? Because all this, you have to deal with the licensing. So far, only AMD and Intel, there's cross-licensing with AMD. That's why there's only 2 offerings. Nvidia cannot get into x86 unless they have this kind of agreement. So I think this is definitely good for Nvidia because it really opened up their markets. So I think that's the announcement. In terms of the manufacturing, right, Nvidia reiterates that it will continue to evaluate Intel Foundry. However, the collaborations does not move Nvidia GPU manufacturing away from TSMC at this stage. Intel's role is CPU and advanced packaging for joint parts. I think this is quite key, right, because people will ask about what's the impact to TSMC. But bear in mind that, let's say when we talk about all these GPU, right now, I think Nvidia really order a lot of foundry services from TSMC. So even if Intel want to sell their foundry business to Nvidia, right, I don't think they have the scale to offer that. But all these things is not a binary, right? Because if you look at the chiplet and if you break it down, all these die, right, you will notice that, let's say if Intel, they want to offer a little bit here and a little bit there, right, as long as they are able to execute, I think there's still opportunity for Intel to sell their foundry business, not to sell their foundry business, is to use their IFS, their foundry business, and make Nvidia become their customers. I think there's still such opportunity. It's just that in terms of scale, I don't think so, because all this advanced manufacturing, right, is completely different as compared to all the mature nodes, right? And right now, I think Intel, in terms of the scale, they still don't have it. So at least we're talking about, let's say, next 2 or 3 years, right? I think all these GPU fabs, right, will still be at TSMC side. But let's see whether Intel is able to really execute so well that Nvidia is willing to cede a little bit of their business. Maybe not the data center chip, right? It could be all the consumer chip. I think everything is possible here. It's just that for now, let's focus on the first 2 product tracks that I mentioned above, the data center and also the PCs, and take the foundry away from now. It is not in their announcement. Then in terms of the money flow, I think it was announced that $5 billion of USD equity investment, right? And Nvidia really come up with the money and subscribe to the shares. I think this is definitely good. It will beef up Intel balance sheet because their balance sheet doesn't look well after like so many years of cash burning and still not much revenue increase. So I think this is definitely good. In terms of the share ownership, I think Nvidia now hold about 4.9% of Intel, and I think this is more like a alignment instead of like big acquisitions. So it's only 4.9%. Why this matters technically? So I think if you read the announcement, right, you notice that they will talk about this NVLink on x86, not just PCIe, right? And just now I also mentioned a bit. So today, most x86 based Nvidia servers couple GPUs over PCI Express retimers. So these retimers, you can think of it as like a signal booster, which cap scale, because I think when they route through all these different GPUs, right, the signal will weaken. So they need all these retimers to boost the signal. But if you do it too much, right, actually it will create too much latency and it hits the performance. So Nvidia rack scale NVL72 uses NVLink and today ships with ARM-based Grace nodes. Adding NVLink capable x86 lets Nvidia offer rack scale NVLink fuse system to customers standardized on x86, addressing the majority of enterprise and CSP estates. I think this is all about opening up the market because, like I said earlier, right, so not every enterprise is ready to embrace ARM Grace CPU offerings, right? So if they can just leverage on whatever that they are using, which is already on x86, and straight away tap into Nvidia GPU, right, I think that's the best now. So this is really opening up market for Nvidia. Then chiplet PCs as a new category. Intel packaging can stitch TSMC built Nvidia GPUs chiplets to Intel x86 dies inside a single SoC package. This targets form factors and cost bands where discrete GPUs are impractical, broadening RTX reach beyond gaming workstation niches. This one, right, is still new. They probably will take another 3-4 years just for the development. So still have to wait. But I think the good thing here is that like there will be a completely new product category, because right now, let's say if you use a laptop and you say you want to use, let's say like Nvidia GPU, right? They remember this GPU is talking to the CPU using PCI Express, and PCI Express, we all know that it is quite limited, right? As they can fuse these 2 chips using chiplet technology, right? Using the EMIB and Vevorus, how to pronounce it? So once they are able to fuse it together, so in terms of the latency, in terms of the coherence, I think it will be, they are able to offer products that current products not able to do. Say for example, I think that it will be massively infused by all the AI technology. The good thing is that you can get that kind of capability while still staying on x86. So you can still use whatever software, because for many companies, they still need all this x86 architecture because their software, right? And there are many enterprise software they only operate on x86, right? So you don't need to have like a separate PC to do different things. Everything just stay on the x86. I think this is a huge win for x86 as well, because if you notice, right, over time, right, this x86, they are going downhill one, because I think if you use ARM-based CPU, right, number one benefit is definitely the power consumption is a lot lower, right? So for x86, because I think right now they are still quite performant if you just compare the performance, right? But in terms of the power, they are not there. But I think this one, it will at least prolong their lifespan. So it's a win for Intel as well. All right, so in terms of the strategic implications, I think I mentioned all these, like bigger TAM without the fat breeze. Then in terms of the capital allocations, the 5 billion is also, it is a symbolic alignment. So I think this is good. And then if we look at for Intel, right, so it anchor revenue and credibilities. So I think all this is to say that, let's say without this partnership, right, they still need to compete with AMD to squeeze into the servers of Nvidia servers, right? Then right now with these partnerships, it's like automatically they are like the number one customers already. So I think this is definitely good. It provides stability. It provides like people knows that, okay, Intel, we don't need to worry so much about whether they will have revenue in future or not. Because let's say without this, right, we still don't know. Maybe AMD come up with a CPU that's much better as compared to Intel's one, right? Then Intel, they will really lose out to AMD. Then they will really die, So I think this one really adds some credibility and some provides an important anchor. But this is not a foundry coup, so just like I mentioned. But of course, when there's all this kind of partnership, right, at least they are on the table. The question is whether they can execute or not, right? So I think this one under Lip-Butan's partnership, I believe they should be doing much better as compared to the previous CEO. Then for the ecosystem I mentioned earlier, TSMC, I think no impact for now. But let's say if we talk about the hit to AMD, right? Say for example, AMD compete with Intel on all these servers CPU, right? If AMD business affected, then TSMC also will be affected, because AMD, I think when it comes to all these fabs, right, they are still using TSMC, and I think some of them they are also using Samsung fabs, right? So I think that there could be some impact there. In terms of AMD, yes, I think it's bad for AMD, but it is not immediate kind of bad now, because this is basically, we're talking about Intel versus AMD competitions, right? In the past, I think AMD has been doing very well because they are using TSMC Foundry, and TSMC Foundry is a lot better as compared to the Intel Foundry, right? So they tap on a better supplier when it comes to their chip fabrications. That's how they win. Then right now, I think Intel is trying to make a comeback and fight with AMD. But let's see how they can defend their market here. Then when it comes to the laptop business, I think it's also AMD will have a problem here, because once Nvidia and Intel have all this great partnership and their chip can work together so well, right? And it is so as like a single SoC, right? Then AMD still needs to use the PCI Express. In terms of performance, there will be stuff that AMD cannot do with PCI Express, right? So they will lose out on that. So I think over, let's say like a medium to longer term time frame, right? As long as Intel and Nvidia, they can work together well and they can execute well, right? I think then that is very, very, very bad for AMD. For ARM, right now I would say no impact, because Nvidia states that ARM CPU roadmap continues. So no impact here. It is more like, I think for Nvidia, it's like there's a H, right? There's a x86 path, and then the ARM, they will continue. So I think it's like a multiple track that work in parallel. So I think one serve as H for the other. So I think ARM's business won't be affected. But if this x86 partnership with Nvidia, right? I think if this work out very well, I think for ARM also will be affected, because remember, this Grace CPU, right, is actually partnership between Nvidia with ARM. So if they got cannibalized on that, right, then ARM will also be affected. But I think it's not a huge deal for ARM, because I think ARM, they still have their anchor customer, right, which is Apple. As long as Apple work well with ARM, I think that they are okay. And ARM themselves, right, they have all sorts of other products that they are developing, right, outside of this. So this is like, I don't think it make a dent on that, not much impact on ARM. Then for Broadcom and others, let me read it out here. If NVLink becomes the default high-speed fabric in NVIDIA-led racks with Intel CPU, vendors monetizing PCIe retimers or alternate interconnects could see reduced share of wallet in those nodes. Yeah, this one, I don't want to comment too much, right, because I haven't really read out like on like Broadcom and others so much, right? So I think basically that's it on today's sharing. Just a short one, because you can see, right, I'm also struggling. I also do all this research on the spot and try to understand, because I think the news announcement is fairly simple. Actually, you can watch the interview with Jensen Huang and also Lip-Butan, right? I think they explain it. I think it's quite simple. But in order to understand the detail, right, you need to know know like the current offerings and what are the limitations, right? Say for example, the PCI Express lane, there's one limitations, and how this partnership can get rid of these limitations, right? So all those things, it is a bit technical, so need a bit more like research just to understand like, oh, why this is good for these two companies here. So I think, yeah, it is a good research, given that it's only one day or 2 days research, right? So I think it's definitely good for Nvidia and also for Intel. But for me, right, I've invested in Nvidia for I think 5 years already. For me, my position is still the same. I see this from the perspective of Nvidia shareholders, and I like it when I read this news. And as I further my research on this, right, I think that this is a very like a strategic move that will benefit Nvidia. But if you ask me whether I will invest in Intel or not, my answer is no. The reason is not because I don't trust this strategic direction. I think under Liputan, right, I think they are moving to the right directions. So I have a lot more confidence on Liputan as compared to Gelsinger. So that is definitely true. For those who followed me for a couple of years, you will notice that actually I am very bearish on Intel when it comes to all sorts of things. I think that was even before Gelsinger time. Bob Swan, right, that was the previous CEO, right? I was super bearish on him. Then under Gelsinger, I was a bit like neutral or slightly bearish. But now under Liputan, I'm tend towards on the bullish side. And the reason I don't invest is because I think in terms of the problem or challenges that they need to fix, right, is still quite sizable. It is not easy to fix this kind of problem. It's like huge challenge, but you have a good CEO that is moving on the right direction. Do you want to bet or not? I think that's the questions that I ask myself. And for me, I tend to stay, let's say, like neutral and towards slightly bullish on Intel. But for Nvidia, it's like, I'm big bull, right? So invested for so long already. Everything that Jensen did, I can see like why he's doing all this. And he's really like try to leverage on their strength and just see, okay, where's the holes or where's the vacuum that is not yet served, right? And they just go all into all these different pockets, right? And they have the resources to do these kind of things. Let's say if Intel is doing well, right? They don't even need to do these kind of things. They don't need to seed their GPU business to Nvidia. This is how I see it, by the way. They don't need to do this, right? And if they can compete well with, let's say, like AMD, right? They also don't need this kind of partnership. And they don't need to dilute their shareholders by let Nvidia invest that 5 billion, right? So all these things, you can see that they're not at the upper hand when it comes to this kind of negotiation. But the CEO is still very smart, Liputan. So he make use of their strength, which is the x86, and also their Intel chip laptops business, which they still have a sizable market share, right? So they just want to leverage on all this and negotiate with Nvidia and get a good deal. So it's a smart move. That's take away from me. See you in the next one. Bye bye.